Way. As always, I'm just going to do whatever the coordinator, Kelly Crozier, tells us to do. Welcome to meeting number 23 of the Planning and Housing Committee. I'll start by acknowledging that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Councillor Curry has said she will be late, but may I get a roll call, please, Kelly?
Councillor Brockington?
Here.
Councillor Curry, Councillor Dudas? Councillor Johnson?
Here.
Councillor Kavanagh?
Present.
Councillor Kelly?
Present.
Councillor Kitts? Councillor Lowe?
Here.
Councillor Tierney? Councillor Troster?
Here.
And Vice Chair Gower?
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I know there's an East End announcement this morning to which a number of our colleagues are probably attending. Councillor Kitts has advised that she's going to be late with respect to her items, so if it's okay with the committee, when I get to the Navin Road item, we'll move that toward the back. So running through, this is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.2 to 4.5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment, to submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on March 6, 2024. Please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest? None were filed. Thank you. Are there minutes of the Planning and Housing Committee meeting 22, Valentine's Day, confirmed? Thank you. The development review items, the zoning bylaw amendment for 112-134 Nelson Street, that item has been withdrawn, so we'll hear that at some point in future. There's a zoning bylaw amendment proposed for 266 Park Street in Rideau Vanier. We don't have any public delegations signed up to speak to it. Did any member want this held? Tyler, if the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still wish to speak? No. Is this item carried? Thank you. The zoning bylaw amendment for 845 Champlain Street, we have public delegations and a presentation, so we're going to hold that item. The zoning bylaw amendment for 3317 Navin Road, we have public delegations and a presentation for that item, so we'll hold it, and we'll hold it toward the end, I think, until Councillor Kitts is able to make it back to her seat. The item at 266 and 268 Carruthers Avenue and 177 Armstrong, we have a presentation, we have delegations to speak to that item, so we're going to hold it. We're good to go. Does anyone, I'm wondering if we can let staff go. There is a motion, there's the information previously distributed, cash in lieu of parkland, which I assume the committee receives. There is the motion from Councillor Kavanagh with respect to St. Paul's Church identification signage with message center. I don't think were members anticipating any debate on that one. I wonder if we can just deal with that now. I know Councillor Johnson has some direction she'd like to ask of staff. Councillor Kavanagh, do you want to introduce that motion now?
Sure. Am I allowed to read the whole thing?
Yeah, thanks.
Hold on. Whereas St. Paul's Presbyterian Church is proposing the installation of a replacement ground sign with electronic message center at 971 Woodruff Avenue and Canada's capital region for over 60 years, providing invaluable spiritual, charitable, and communal services available to all members of the community. Whereas the ground sign previously installed at the location in 1981 was installed with a manual message center and replaced in 2019 without the benefit of a permit, and whereas the church wishes to upgrade the existing sign and installation to install a replacement message center, And whereas the proposed signage does not comply with the permanent signs on private property bylaw, and whereas it is recommended to allow this request beyond the general application process for minor variance found in the delegation of authority provisions of bylaw 2016-326, which would result in the loss of $2,183 to the city, which is the corresponding minor variance fee. And whereas Heritage staff do not object to the application, therefore, be it resolved that Planning and Housing Committee recommends that Council approve in respect of 971 Woodruff Avenue an exemption of sections 103B and 112B2 of the permanent signs on private property bylaw 2016-326 as amended to allow the installation of a digital message center of a property listed on the city's heritage register, and two, the installation of a digital message center less than 45 meters from a residential use in a residential zone where it is visible from that use. When in fact it's actually been working since 2019, but they hadn't had the permission.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. I know Councillor Johnson wanted to ask staff if they'd be willing to undertake a direction. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The reason why I wanted to bring forward the direction is simply because, we have a motion on the floor to create an exception for a church on the permanent signs on private property bylaw, and my conversations with staff relating to a church in my ward just 2 weeks ago ended up in a different direction. And so I was hoping that the staff would take this direction to review the current provisions of the permanent signs on private property bylaw, including fees that could restrict or impact message centers for these types of groups. So schools, places of worship, recreation, athletic facility use, nonprofit organizations. The fees are quite prohibitive as well. So I understand from staff they'd be willing to bring back some recommendations to Planning and Housing and to Heritage Committee towards the end of the year. So would that be agreeable to staff?
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, my staff and Building Code Services will take that away and report back.
Thank you so much. We'll submit the language through the clerk.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So that item is dealt with. Oh, sorry, on the Councillor Kavanaugh's motion, is that carried? Thank you.
Thank you.
So we go to the first held item, and I've already forgotten what it is. Park Street? No, we carried that. Champlain Street. So this is a zoning bylaw amendment for 845 Champlain. Lucy Ramirez, do you have a presentation for us? Perfect. I know we have a public delegation, so we'll just get a brief overview of what the proposal is. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of Planning Committee, and the general public. My name is Lucy Ramirez. I'm the file lead on this rezoning application. The address is 845 Champlain Street. Next slide, please. The designation is suburban east. It's a minor corridor. You can see with the arrow where the location is. Next slide, please. There's also a secondary plan that covers this area, and the designation within that secondary plan is O-Train Minor Corridor, and that promotes a mix of uses as well as a 4-story height limit. Next slide, please. This just goes to the 4-story height limit. Next slide, please. Planning staff is recommending approval of the application for 845 Champlain Street as shown in document 1 to permit a stacked dwelling with 10 units and a parking lot in the rear yard as detailed in document 2.
Thank you very much. So I know Christian Campanelli with Evo Space Developments, who I'm guessing is the applicant. Are they online or are they here? Hi, Christian. Is there anything that you wanted to add, or if you'd like, I can give you the opportunity once the public delegations to take 5 minutes to answer anything that you may hear after public delegations speak. I did prepare a brief presentation. Yep, come on up, Ben.
Okay, so this is, my name is Christian Campanelli, president of Evo Space Developments. So yeah, this site, it's on the O-Train corridor. It's very close to the Ottawa River. It's north with the multi-use pathway, and there's the town center of Orleans just south, which also has the Place d'Orleans LRT, which is under construction. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please. So the official plan says, like, across the street is a hub, which allows for 40 stories for suburban transects. And this site is on a minor corridor, which as per the official plan, will allow up to 5 to 7 stories. But next slide, the secondary plan takes precedent over that, and it's saying 4 stories for our site, and across the street will be 18 stories, and then 40 stories closer to the town center. Next slide. And then this is our concept. So it's a zoning approval. So we are going to do 3.5 stories, which is under the 4. And we're asking for from R1N to R4NC with some exceptions, and happily get into some detail about that. And thank you.
Thank you very much for that additional detail. Do members, and I do appreciate the honing in on what's important. That's great. Thank you both for that in the presentations. Do members have any questions for the applicant? If not, taking a look, nope. Thank you very much for the presentation. So we do have public delegations. Marie Jolicoeur is the first I have listed, who is online. So Ms. Jolicoeur, we'll just wait for you to get online there. And
I'm here.
good morning. Whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Okay, well, I don't really have a presentation. I went through the document that we received. First of all, I'm the neighbor of the project. And I recognize that there's a need for housing. And I champion our new youth who has a project and who has plans. The only consideration is every concern that was brought forth, some important ones, like, for example, the value of the house and the well-being of the house. Because I know that here on the Jeanne d'Arc, maybe because it's on clay, whenever there's a bus going by, we feel the tremor going through the house. So my concern is when there's going to be the destruction of this house that is there right now, how it's going to affect the nearby houses. So maybe that's something that needs to be talked with the president, Monsieur Christian, which I've met. He's a really nice man. But there was not really any response. Maybe this is not the time for a response, or maybe there's another way. I'm wondering if somebody can tell me something about this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jolicoeur. I think we have one other public delegation after you, and then I know members of the committee will ask Ms. Ramirez to provide some details on, what the further engagement opportunities are around the technical details of the proposal and how it will be constructed, et cetera. So we'll pose your questions to the city planner on this file.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, merci. Okay, any other questions for Ms. Jolicoeur? I don't see
no.
any.
No, that was my main concern. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have another public delegation. Okay, there was Mir Hashimi and Maria. Are you here in the public gallery today? I don't see any indication, and the coordinator has no indication that you are.
We are online.
Oh, you're online? Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to our panelists. We are living on 847 Champlain Street, just beside that building that you're doing. This area is actually this side of the street, it's all houses. There is no apartments. And right now at that 845, there is only one house. But then the project is that they want to demolish it and make 10 units for level up in the main area. There is no more houses around it. So our concern is the same as Marie, the demolishing and the moving and damaging our house. So we would like if there will be a pre-inspection for the house to see if everything is okay when the houses they are doing the demolishing and construction will not damage our houses. But we will lose also our privacy in this area because we moved this area because we wanted to have a house, not beside a block of apartments. Now there is 10 units and also a lot of driving. You cannot park on the Champlain streets, they have to park inside. So there is a parking lot and 10 units. It's a very crowded area for us. And beside that will be they're also talking about there will be some stores downstairs. So we don't know what type of a store will be commercial stores. This will be a pot store or what. So we are worried. Well, I'm very worried about the planning, and I have kids and I have a disabled child. So for me, I don't know what to do. This was my concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. And again, I think we'll pose Ms. Ramirez some questions with respect to the construction impacts, and then with respect to the zoning implications of a 10-unit apartment next to the single. We register and hear your concern. Do members have any further questions for the public delegate? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your intervention here today. So members, does anyone have any questions for city staff? Vice Chair.
Just like city staff, if they can respond to the delegation concerns about construction impact that we heard.
Thank you, Chair. The construction of low-rise infill development that has shallow excavation does not typically damage neighboring foundations. The Ontario Building Code does include some safeguards to mitigate damage to adjacent properties during construction. And it's recommended that adjacent property owners take photos of their foundation and that before and after construction, and that if any damage occurs, the builder is responsible for fixing them within a reasonable time frame.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I know the applicant is still here, I think. Sorry. Would you be willing to reach out to the public delegations from whom we've heard and just talk about some of their concerns one-on-one directly?
Absolutely. I've actually met both the public delegates. I met them face-to-face. We had a chat. And they have my business card. So any kind of concerns I want to, when we have our building permits approved, we'll touch base before and throughout the process to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Okay. Thank you for undertaking that. And I'm sorry, is this just below or just above the threshold at which there will be site plan? There's no site plan on this one. Yep.
That's correct.
Are there any other questions for staff? Is this item carried? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the item for Navin Road, has Councillor Kitts joined us online? No. Okay, so I'm going to skip over Navin for the time being and move to 266, 268 Carruthers Avenue and 177 Armstrong. Adrian, I think you have a presentation for us. Oh, and we have a technical motion as well, so while staff are taking their seats, I'll ask Vice Chair Gower to make that.
Whereas the buildings on the parcels of land known as 266 and 268 Carruthers Avenue and 177 Armstrong Street are owned by Taberge Homes, and whereas the building located at 266 Carruthers Avenue is currently vacant and subject to site plan control and building permit processes, and whereas the site is subject to a demolition control application in the event the owner applies to demolish the buildings before obtaining site plan control approval and issuance of a building permit, and whereas the owner has obtained site plan control and building permit approval for the building located at 177 Armstrong Street, and such building is nearing completion, and whereas the owner has applied for a zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control approval to construct a replacement building at 266 and 268 Carruthers Avenue, and whereas by waiving demolition control approval, the city will not receive $5,339.42, includes $1,028 legal fee and HST, which is the fee associated with the demolition control application. Therefore, be it resolved that given the unique circumstances, Council waive demolition control approval and allow the owner to proceed directly to demolition of 266 Carruthers Avenue via demolition permit, making the site safe for the public.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. So, Andrew.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. As you know, I'm Andrew McCrate, Manager with Development Review Central. I want to start off by giving a kudos to my planner, Adrian Funvake, who was the file lead on this application, but unfortunately couldn't join us today. So I'll be taking over his presentation, which he was well prepared for, but we'll give it a go. So before you is the zoning bylaw amendment application concerning the properties at 177 Armstrong and 266 and 268 Carruthers Avenue. Next slide, please. The property is located in the Hintonburg neighborhood. You'll note that it is a unique L-shaped property with both frontage on Armstrong Street as well as Carruthers. It's on the north side of Armstrong Street, generally between Hinchy and Carruthers. There's already an apartment building being built on the 177 Armstrong portion, and there is a house remaining on Carruthers that was just the topic of the motion you just went over. Next slide, please. This is a zoom in of the property you can see the lot fabric and unique orientation of this property as well as the L-shaped configuration. The development at 177 Armstrong is already approved and under construction. The applicant is expecting to complete construction shortly, aiming for occupancy in May. It's a 33-unit apartment building and it forms part of this development site, but that portion of it is already constructed. The image on the right of the screen is the front of that 3.5-story apartment building. Next slide, please. The driver for this application came after the fact of the development at 177 Armstrong, where the owner, Taberge Homes, consolidated the two properties on Carruthers Avenue. And what's before you is the development for now an 18-unit, 3.5-story apartment on the Carruthers side. But it's being developed as a PUD, so a planned unit development. So the two buildings will sit on this development lot. They'll share things like the access for waste collection. There's a large rear yard area that would also be shared between the two buildings. But the driver of the application is this 18-unit apartment building. So some of the relief being sought, next slide please, is the setbacks, an increase in the number of dwelling units from 12 to 18, some reduction in parking, loss of 3 spaces and 1 visitor, as well as some of the projections like not allowing balconies on the front story. Next slide, please. You can see in this image on the right, that's the proposed zoning schedule. So it's a very simplified zoning schedule to show where those two buildings sit in relation to the property. And I think it's important to recognize when looking at the lot fabric that this is a unique lot compared to the balance of the lot fabric. But there's a lot of work done through this application to get to a built form that is appropriate and compatible with the surroundings. The initial application that came in had the Carruthers building going all the way back to the rear lot line, and staff and the community made a lot of efforts to open up that rear yard amenity area so that we had a continuity of open rear yard amenity area, opportunity for urban tree canopy, and really looking at an appropriate built form that respects both the public realm, as these two buildings present Armstrong and Carruthers, and looking at the setbacks on the surrounding building. So that was a significant change through application review. Next slide, please. So the recommendation before committee is a recommendation for approval of the zoning details to allow for these apartments to proceed, the one that's currently under construction from previous approvals and the new apartment on Carruthers. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I know we have a number of public delegations. Patricia and Scott, ordinarily, like the practice we've established in this term, and I think the previous terms of council, was that the applicant would go after staff and make a presentation. I've heard from FOTEN that they would like the opportunity rather to respond or make a presentation once they've had a chance to hear the community's concerns. So I'm actually going to give you the option today. Do you want to make a presentation now, or would you prefer to take your 5 minutes after the public delegations so that you can incorporate the concerns that you've heard from the public delegations? Thank you. So in that case, Cheryl, Linda, and Celine. Good morning, all three from the Hintonburg Community Association. I'm not going to pretend that these are three separate delegations, so if you just want to flow from one into the other, that would be awesome. We're in your hands.
Sure, we'll save you time that way. So good morning, councillors. So I wanted to give you a bit of the context of Carruthers and our community, but Carruthers in particular. So in all the documents, it's described as residential buildings that include single and semi-detached homes and low-rise apartment buildings. The singles are few and very far between. Most buildings are more than one unit. So these photos, I think, will give you a better idea of the density, especially of this street, and this entire block is extremely dense and similar to the rest of Hintonburg, really. So this photo is just to the south of the proposed unit, or the proposal, and it's 3 units. In the background, just to the left, you can see part of 177 Armstrong, the new building that's being finished now. That's part of the planned unit development. It stretches all the way behind it, but it fills up what would have been, at one point in time, a backyard. So next slide, please. So this is just right to the north of the proposal, and this is 14 units. This is a new building. And next slide, please. This is just a tiny bit further north, and this is 10 to 12 units. It was a little hard to figure out how many units there were in there, but there's at least 10 plus at least 2 or 3 other units that it's unclear what they are. And next slide, please. Again, just a bit further north, this is a 6-unit building, and then the building that you see just to the right of it looks sort of like a duplex, but that's in fact 4 units that will be redeveloped. And in the tiny space between it and the red brick building right on the corner will be a triplex going in there. And that building right on the corner that you see, the red brick one, has 3 or 4 units. And next slide, please. So this one is across from the proposal, and it has 6 units. And then the 2 buildings just to the right of that sort of look like houses, but in fact, that's 8 units. And next slide, please. This property's been vacant for a year, and it's slated for redevelopment. We will be seeing the plans, we hope, within a couple of weeks. It has at least 5 units at the front and possibly 5 or 6 units in the white building that is kind of behind it. So this one block of Carruthers already has at least 97 units in 26 buildings, which provides an average of 3.7 units per building. So 2 properties on this block have been empty, boarded, and fenced for 1 year, and the other one for more than 2 years. Our existing density has already exceeded the official plan target or the official plan wish for the next 25 years, taking us to 2046. Over 930 units have been or are currently under construction over the last 8 years. And we have another 3,300 units that have already been approved just within Hintonburg, but are not yet built or even started. Some of them were approved a decade ago. So the density target or the wish isn't really a factor here, but the type of units that are needed is the bigger question. And if we could go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Linda Hoad.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me get started in the right place here. This application illustrates several issues arising from current intensification policies, or more accurately, implementation of the policies. As you've seen, Carruthers is a narrow one-way street, which has seen a relentless replacement of older, single detached homes. Most of them are actually multi-unit homes, although they look and may have been built originally as single-family homes. Many of them had rear yards, and they offer family-sized units, many of them. The replacement buildings range from single-family long semis, often with accessory units and triplexes, to a high-rise building which is out of this block but is just north at Scott Street. This slide illustrates the fact that the number of new units, as my colleague Cheryl has pointed out, is startling, but very discouraging is the lack of 3-bedroom units. The question marks are there to mark ones where we suspect there might be a 3-bedroom unit, but we aren't able to confirm that. In spite of requesting every single application, and you don't see all of the applications that we see, the Committee of Adjustment handles many of the applications for intensification in our neighborhood, as I suspect in your neighborhoods as well. We meet with the applicants. We always ask for 3-bedroom units. We always get the answer no. So the number, and the official plan has a policy which concerns the diversity of housing opportunities to provide housing choice. We're not getting the housing choice we need. Carruthers is situated, as is almost all of Hintonburg, within 600 meters of transit. We have a lot of transit stations around Hintonburg, and it's zoned for intensification, which we understand and support. Carruthers is a 15-minute community already. It's ideally situated for family living. Within walking distance of this proposed development, we find the Rosemount Library, Somerset West Community Health Centre, Connaught Public School, Fisher Park Public School and Summit Alternative School, École Élémentaire Catholique Saint-François d'Assise, Hintonburg Community Centre and Park, Devonshire School, McCormick Park, right across the street from 177, geared to young children and seniors who would benefit from some of the things my colleague Celine will discuss. Parkdale Market and Park, which includes a wading pool. It's a very attractive child space. Sterling Carruthers Park to the north of this development, geared to young children. Failure to provide family-sized units in a neighborhood such as this will potentially lead to a loss of some of these services. Councillor Leeper may recall the fight to save Devonshire School. Maybe he doesn't go back that far. It was a battle that played out in several communities. I think it was in the early 90s. The school board thought, oh, nobody wants to live here. And they were thinking of closing schools. And if we don't get more families, we may face that situation again. I want to draw your attention to the report on the 3-bedroom policy in our official plan, which is in Appendix A of the submission we sent in to you. This report was submitted in June 2023, posted to the Engage Ottawa site. Not a word about it has been seen or heard since then. You will say this is part of the zoning bylaw work, but given what we're seeing in Hintonburg, which I'm sure is not unique, I believe that the question of how to provide 3-bedroom units and where to provide them is critical. I hope that you will direct staff to bring forth a report or a response to this report soon. This needs to be discussed. We're losing ground here. The consultant offers a number of alternatives to the existing policy in the official plan of requiring 3-bedroom units in high-rise buildings near transit. In particular, I want to draw your attention to one of the recommendations, which is near the bottom of the first page. Denser infill permissions in low-density neighborhoods. The idea of increasing missing middle housing options and ending exclusionary zoning in existing low-density neighborhoods has received a lot of attention. And he says, allowing denser infill in existing neighborhoods could be a way to expand the supply of family-sized housing in Ottawa. The consultant then discusses the including plex housing, small 3- or 4-story apartment buildings with no or limited parking. These are the solutions that we're looking at here in Ottawa. We've done this for some time, but we're not requiring 3-bedroom units in these forms of housing. So,
Linda, your section is out of time.
Okay, can I give you my last paragraph? No. Oh, thank you. The lack of 3-bedroom units in this development is nothing less than a tragedy. The planned unit development includes a large open rear yard shared by the occupants of 177 Armstrong in the new building, 280 square meters or 3,014 square feet. How many of you have you seen an open landscape space like that? The fundamental problem is the applicant is trying to increase the number of units in this building from the permitted 12. We urge you to amend our recommendation, written recommendation, and amend the application to allow a maximum of 12 to 14 units, which would allow the applicant to provide some larger units and to deal with the serious accessibility issues, which my colleague Céline will explain now. Thank you.
Hello, is it on? Is the mic on? Okay. Yeah. I have a set of slides that need to be pulled up. Oh, perfect. Okay. Good morning. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so typically we don't really talk about site plan issues. However, these site plan issues need to be discussed due to the lack of accessibility inside of the building. On this slide, before I start, I just want to note the importance of a depressed curb in front of the building entrance. Since it allows tenants to be dropped off and the disabled or elderly to hop on to get on the curb without having to use their wheelchair on the street. So on this slide, the blue dashed line represents the route a tenant with mobility needs would have to take to access the garbage room and the shared outdoor living space. So the tenant would have to go up or towards Wellington on Carruthers, turn onto Armstrong, and then back to their building through an alley. So snow removal and ice is already just a big issue in winter in Ottawa. And this is a very long path to just get back to your building. So next slide, please. So here is a color-coded for the landscape and why they would have to do that pathway to get to the garbage room and the outdoor living space. So the only proposed precast concrete is in the yellow, which is located at the secondary exit, which is not a barrier-free exit to the building. So there's no way to go around the building without having to go down Carruthers, around Armstrong, and back to the alley. Next slide, please. So here is the basement level, provides an amenity of a storage room, which is not accessible to tenants with disabilities, the elderly, or even parents to young children with strollers. So you would have to go down the stairs to the basement level and down another set of stairs to access the storage room. Next slide, please. So this is the ground floor, which presents many issues. Upon entrance through the barrier-free entrance, you are met with a set of stairs or a lift. The lift is provided due to it having 18 units and the lack of space for an elevator. So you enter the lift, you go up the level, and you have to make a 90-degree turn to exit the lift. And anyone in construction knows that there needs to be a 5-foot turning point for individuals using wheelchairs and scooters. So right there, the lift is already dysfunctional, as you need to enter and turn 90 degrees, including having to bring your groceries in there and having to bring your garbage out through the lift because there's no access to the garbage room. So the garbage room, so if miraculously you get out of the lift somehow, you are now on the ground level where these accessible units are located. And there is the storage room that has, the garbage room that requires steps to go down to. Personally, I would not like to have to ask my neighbor to take out my garbage for me because that is taking away independence from me or other disabled individuals. Next slide, please. So another amenity that is offered is a terrace or a rooftop area, which is also not accessible. Next slide, please. So in summary, if you are disabled or you have any mobility issues, you cannot access the garbage room, you cannot access the storage room, you cannot access the outdoor living space, you cannot access the terrace. And a lift that is, as of now, I don't have the specifications of how big this lift is gonna be, but as it is on the plan right now with the 90-degree turn, is already not functional at all. So next slide, please. Just a reminder that accessibility is not only for the disabled, it benefits everyone. And that barriers are around everywhere in public spaces, and somebody's home should not be any more disabling for them. It should be a place where they can relax and be able to do their stuff. Next slide, please. So what I ask you is, if you were a tenant and you are looking for an apartment, would you pay to live in a place where you cannot access these necessities and amenities? Thank you.
Right on time. Thank you very much. Compelling presentation, obviously. Councillor Troster has questions for you.
Thank you so much. Well, I just wanted to point out that well, first of all, thank you for the comments about accessibility. I imagine that members of our committee will have comments for the applicant. And I will be asking staff if any of this can be fixed during the building permit process. But my question for you is, so I just want to say that the issue of losing 3-bedroom apartments is very close to my heart because we're experiencing the very same thing in Centertown. Every older single-family home that may have been chopped up into a couple of larger apartments, every one of those that's taken down is being replaced with bachelors and 1-bedrooms. We are also losing 2- and 3-bedrooms at a huge rate in Centertown. So I just wanted to thank you for making those comments. I'm just curious if you had any policy recommendations for how we might improve increase the number of 3-bedroom apartments being built in the city, because just like you, I ask the very same question of every developer, and unless it is required because they're building a high-rise, I'm told they can't do it, it's too expensive, no one wants to live there, which of course is completely contradictory to what I hear from my community, so.
Yes, I wasn't involved in the official plan this time. I thought I had done my share of official plans. I was shocked to hear that the proposal is to put 3-bedroom units in high-rise apartments, which is why I was quite interested to find the consultant's report. If you haven't read it, you should. He's not in favor of 3-bedroom apartments in high-rises. He goes through all the market and various other reasons why it's not a good idea, which is why he has some suggestions at the end of the report, which seem to be in line with what I think most of us feel is the best solution for providing larger units. We are not requiring, and that's what Cheryl pointed out, we have a wish that these would appear. They have to be a requirement. If it's not in the zoning bylaw, actually, we'll have to amend the official plan probably to put them into the zoning bylaw. I'm not an expert on planning, but I suspect there may be some changes required. It has to be a requirement. There is no way you can build an 18-unit or an infill in a neighborhood with neighborhood amenities, a family neighborhood, if you don't build 3-bedroom units.
Yeah, and I'll point out the developers that are excelling at this are the nonprofit developers. So the building on Forward Avenue that CCOC built to replace the old family shelter does contain 3-bedroom units, and all of their apartments are what they would consider visitor accessible, plus they have fully accessible apartments there too. So, you know, if the nonprofit sector can do it and they're not making a lot of money because they're not even, you know, the purpose is to provide affordable housing, I agree with you that we should be challenging the broader development community. So I appreciate your comment.
It also occurred to me that they're competing with all the other 1- and 2-bedroom, new 1- and 2-bedrooms, and there's way more than we discussed because there are lots of them being built on Wellington, the other side of Parkdale. They'd have a unique product. I can't imagine that they couldn't market it.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to ask similar questions to my colleague, but thank the Community Association for bringing forward the concerns around 3 bedrooms and for sharing in your submission some of that background. And I'm sure it's something a number of us will follow up on with staff. It may be something that can be resolved through the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. Maybe it needs a different policy approach. But it's important to raise, and it's a challenge not just in Hintonburg, but in other parts of the city where we're seeing more apartment development. So thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair. So the great presentation, by the way. The comments about the accessibility concerns are enlightening, I guess, to say the least. I just have one question that's sort of one question about one of the terms that you used in the presentation about the accessibility portion. And so, tiny bit of background, when I started learning English, it was British English. So a lift and an elevator to me is exactly the same thing. Can you, do you mind telling me what the difference is between the two?
Yes, so a lift is an open space, kind of a cube, and it's typically used for like 2 to 6, 7 steps of height. So it's not an elevator. You go, so you need a key to open it. You roll in or whatever, and it's an open space, so there's no top, and it's usually glass, and it's only typically used for minimal amount of stairs. So it's not to be used by tenants without mobility needs. And they typically are small. The one in my building right now, I have, there is one to access the mailroom, and I think it was 3 by 4 feet for the size of it, which is very small, especially if you have to turn 90 degrees to get out of it. Typically, they're done so you go in one direction and you go out the same, so you can go forward, backwards. But yeah, lift is a lot more challenging than an elevator.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that clarification. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for pointing out about family units. It's something I talk about a lot. As Chair of Ottawa Community Housing, we have to provide family units, but we just can't build them fast enough. We need to have it happen in the private market as well. So I appreciate it. I realize the profit margin isn't as great when you have larger units, but it's necessary when we want to rebuild communities and have children and, you know, have a good mix of people. I imagine we'll see things happening once Tunney's Pasture gets rolling, just a couple blocks away, and I think that's something we have to push on, that is to make it very family-oriented. But I appreciate that you're going after these individual files and pointing this out, because your point is well taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions from members. I have a quick question, however, and I apologize. That was painted as a technical motion, but we've got a waiver of demolition control on the table that was put there by Councillor Gower. So that technical motion is actually a waiver of demolition control to allow the existing buildings to come down. I apologize. I was watching that discussion with my staff and city staff last night, and I don't think you had any awareness of it. Is that anything you wanted to comment on? I'll just give you that chance now. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, just a concern that this is being done to avoid paying the vacant unit tax, as we've seen with some other properties. It's been vacant for a couple of years now, the construction office. It's not going to be habitable, I know, but I'm not quite sure why this has come forward. I was a little bit surprised when I was hearing this, because we had another instance where that happened, and again, we opposed it, where they took down 14 units that were habitable. They evicted people, and then they got a demolition order, and clearly nothing's happened in the last year. It's still an empty lot. So my concern is that we create an empty lot, we don't get the vacant unit tax from it, and what will it become? Will it be the parking lot? Will it become a problem with dumping, as we have at the other property that's been demolished now? So I have concerns about it, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to provide that opportunity, and I hope the applicant will address their plans for demolition and why they're seeking this. But I did want to apologize because I was watching that discussion happening last night while I was in another open house, and didn't send that over to you. So I'll try to be a little more proactive on that front moving forward. Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't see any other questions for you from members. So. From the applicants, you do want to make a presentation?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. If the coordinator could please, oh, perfect, just maybe go right to slide 3. My name is Scott Alain. I'm a senior planner from Foten Consultants. I'm joined here by Patricia Warren, who is a planner at Foten as well. I'd like to thank Mr. McCrate for his presentation, and I'd like to thank the Community Association, Ms. Hode, Ms. Parrott for their presentation as well. Mr. Taberge, the owner of the land, sends his regrets. He's attending a funeral today. I'll just get right into my presentation, just pointing to what we heard from the Community Association. Very helpful insights on this file particularly, and many files we do throughout the neighborhood. We're always willing to work with them. On this file particularly, Mr. Chair, you'll recall that we had a meeting with members of the Community Association and your assistant and the applicant, the client rather, which resulted in the key change to the building, which is reducing the floor plate encroachment into the rear yard, opening up more space and creating improved separation. So their contributions have been seen on this file. In terms of, I'm going to try and touch on a number of the items we heard from the community. 3 bedrooms, of course, were noted. This was contemplated for the site. The only kind of drawbacks are the following. So firstly, you're therefore dealing with more complex floor plates without going into the details of the floor plate composition. And in fact, this is something that we'll deal with in further detail at site plan. The introduction of a 3-bedroom unit, which we modeled, would require a projection of the upper floors into the basically abutting property, which is of course owned by the developer. Speaking with staff, this was something we agreed was not necessarily palatable, and so we proceeded with the design as shown. The other thing I wanted to raise is 3-bedroom units. Family units are important to all communities, especially meeting 15-minute neighborhood goals. The requirement for a 3-bedroom unit usually, in many cases, implies the requirement for parking. Given familial obligations, there are often the expectation that if a developer is to introduce a 3-bedroom unit, they will likely expect that it can be parked. Given the character of Carruthers Street, we didn't view it as an appropriate place to add any parking besides the visitor parking that's shown. This is one of the reasons why we proceeded with the development as shown. The accessibility comments were very detailed and informative. Regarding the request for a depressed curb in front of the building, I don't think that's something that we'd be opposed to accommodating, and some of these other things that can be reviewed closer during the site plan process and the building permit process, I think are items that are worth exploring. So thank you for that. I wanted to note that 177 Armstrong, which is the building that you can kind of see to the left of the shown slide currently. That building has an elevator that goes from, accesses all floors of the building, including the rooftop amenity. Because these are a planned unit development, the idea is that they operate with a certain element of synergy, and the notion being that should a tenant with accessibility needs request to live in this planned unit development, the intent would be to locate them in the Armstrong building rather than the Carruthers building for many of these reasons. With concern to the density of Carruthers, it is noted that it is in the evolving overlay, which means that the expectation is density is supposed to shift upward from what is currently shown. So if you look at the site photos shown, you'll see that a datum line, which basically means a roof line character, is carried at the 3rd level. You see it in the building beside ours. You see it in the building, the 177 Armstrong building and the building on the corner. This is what we're looking for. The Scott Street secondary plan says to maintain a low-rise character, and we're going to reflect that. Just one last thing, of course, the client isn't here to speak for himself, but they have an established reputation for constructing. I know the concern is vacant lots. Of course, they've got the 177 Armstrong there under construction. They have many properties throughout the city. And speaking from being the applicant, they're hoping to move forward with this very quickly. In fact, we are working on committee of adjustment consent applications to formalizing the severance between the 2 properties so we can move forward, hopefully this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions for the applicant? I don't see any questions for you. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
So we'll turn to questions for staff, and I know Councillor Chaucer had her hand up quickly.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would just like to pick up on the delegates' questions about the lift and the 90-degree angle and the fact that so many amenities are not available to folks with disabilities or who use mobility devices living in the building. I'm just wondering what is required under the building code in terms of accessibility? Because as we look towards our zoning bylaw review, I think wanting to improve our accessibility standards is something that would be a priority for me. So, if they're technically meeting the standards, but you have a situation where a person in a wheelchair couldn't easily get in and out of the elevator, I think that's a problem. So I'm just wondering if you could let us know what's required and how they're meeting that right now.
Thank you, Chair. The councillor raises an excellent question, and I do take those comments from the Community Association into consideration. I'm only able to answer this question in part because I'm not an expert in building code matters, but I do know as a requirement that a multi-unit apartment with 18 units, at least 15% of those units have to be barrier-free. Where I'm venturing out of my expertise that I'm not going to comment on is the other aspects of the building where accessibility is required, other than I know that the principal entrance into the building would have to be accessible to get to those barrier-free units. And I've seen in cases where a building that doesn't require an elevator, you do have to have that lift system to get to those units. But in terms of access to amenity areas, I personally wouldn't be comfortable responding to that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may offer, John Buck is on the line and prepared to answer questions with respect to building code.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Yeah, with your consent, I'll jump in here. And yeah, I saw the discussion and the presentation on the accessibility. And yeah, these are all concerns that would be flagged in building code services as part of the building permit review process. I mean, broadly, 3.8, the barrier-free requirements of the building code do specify which portions of the building do and don't necessarily have to be accessible. There are, I mean, broadly, the ground floor where the barrier-free entrance would be, not all entrances to buildings need to be accessible. In this instance, I believe it would only be one entrance. However, all normally occupied floor areas do need to be accessible as well. Now, there are some exemptions with respect to service areas and whatnot within a building. Also, lifts are indeed allowable as opposed to full-blown elevators in certain contexts. So without having done obviously a comprehensive review of this, I can certainly flag that, you know, this is always on our radar for in the building permit process. So that's something that under the normal flow of a site plan to a building permit, we will be scrutinizing in detail when it comes to us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think the delegate pointed out the very good point that, you know, you may be able to get in the door of your individual apartment, but if you can't do laundry, if you can't access the amenities that you're paying for in your rent, then that's not truly accessible. So I look forward to gaining more insight through our zoning bylaw review process to try to fix this, because, you know, the cost of rent right now is just astronomical. So if you're moving into a building that's supposed to be providing certain services and the only thing you can access is getting in and out of your apartment door and you can't throw out the garbage, that's a real problem. So thank you so much. And I do want to thank the delegates again today. I really learned a lot, and I think it provides a good starting point for conversations around accessibility and when it comes to improving our zoning. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chaucer. I don't see any other questions from members. And I'm sorry, I was sidebarring with the coordinator, but I'm just wondering, Royce, with respect to ensuring 3-bedroom units in some of the low-rise buildings moving forward, do we expect that that is something that's going to be addressed or not in the comprehensive zoning bylaw review to come?
So, Chair, the 3-bedroom requirement would be looked at through the zoning bylaw review. That would be the appropriate process for us to, council has 2 years, the next 2 years be looking at least 2 drafts of the zoning bylaw to see how that implements the official plan and what more we would be doing. The official plan does speak to targets, so the zoning bylaw has the ability to look at that, and it would be the appropriate instrument since it is a bit more finer grained than what the official plan is. A lot of the 3-bedroom feasibility comes down to lot sizes and configurations, and a zoning bylaw has a better ability to look at what are the right lots to in relation to 3-bedroom units.
Okay, so for the HCA and for the other community associations out there that I know are facing the same issues, you know, get the research underway as we move through the comprehensive zoning bylaw, the opportunity to do exactly what Linda said, which is to ensconce some of these aspirations into the zoning bylaw that can be more easily enforced is coming. I do have some concerns about for example, on this project, the community association had suggested that we should cap the number of units in order to require the developer to put, by capping the number of units, the developer would have more flexibility to create more multi-bedroom units. I am concerned in this project about how much those multi-bedroom units would cost per month. The affordability would be a serious concern for me here. The If the zoning bylaw is clear on how many are required, however, then that can be priced in as the developers are purchasing land. And it would be, I just think, a more orderly rollout rather than doing things on the fly. But I'll leave it there. Vice Chair?
I know we're going way out of scope for a zoning bylaw amendment, but the other caution, I think, would be even if you required 3-bedroom units, we could not dictate whether or not a family with 3 children habitates there. We would have no say. So you might end up in a situation where in order to build those units, the market rent would be so high that it might not actually be feasible for families, and you might end up seeing, say, 3 students moving in together or something. So it's a real challenge. Like, yes, we do need larger apartment units for families, but just requiring 3 bedrooms might not actually achieve that goal. So be interesting to see some of the discussion through the zoning review. Thanks, Chair.
We don't people zone. I don't see any further questions from members. So first is the waiver of demolition control, the motion made by the Vice Chair, carried? Carried. And then is the main report recommendation carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So we are going to come back then. Kelly, unless I'm wrong. What am I doing, Navin? Navin Road. Because I see that Councillor Kitts is here. Our East End colleagues have rejoined us after what I hope was a productive announcement this morning.
Yes, thanks everyone for accommodating this item.
Of course. Okay, so this is the zoning bylaw amendment for 3317 Navin Road. Sorry, did you say Curtis is or is not here? Okay, the public delegation is no longer with us. Did members, since there are no public delegations, did members wish to receive a presentation? I know Councillor Kitts wanted to ask questions of staff. So there's no strong desire on the part of members. Mr. Moody?
Chair, I just want to flag that the planner on the file is on virtually. Show member should,
okay,
if there are questions.
Yeah, so Mr. Chown, if I think, did you want to make a presentation still if the committee is prepared to carry this? Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you still wish to make a presentation if the committee is prepared to carry this, and there are just a few questions from the local councillor? Sorry? Okay, so members are interested in just moving straight ahead to questions of staff at this point, so I think we'll do that. And if you hear something that you need to respond to, we'll give you that opportunity. So Councillor Kitts, the floor is yours for questions for staff.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again, everyone, for holding this item. I do have some questions. I wanted to start by just sort of painting a picture for everyone about this development, since we're not getting a presentation. So it's 164 units, 230 parking spots. This is in the community of Bradley Estates. You've heard me say here many times, we have no walkable commercial amenities in the area, no active transportation options, no efficient transit solutions. And the report highlights all of this. In the report itself, it says, 2024 draft transportation master plan does not identify any cycling infrastructure projects in vicinity of the SETI area. It says the same thing about pedestrian infrastructure. So I think the developer is actually adequately acknowledging the reality of the modal share in this area by accommodating so much parking. I have some concerns about the transportation planning, so I hope that the transportation planner is on the call, because there's only one singular point of exit. There's an elementary school on the southwest corner. There's existing residential on the southeast corner. The intersection is not signalized. So I foresee this being an issue once the development is built. But as per the TIA, the proposed development, it says that it's projected to generate 36 new peak hour two-way vehicle trips in the morning and 30 or in the afternoon and 35 at night. So my question to staff is, we've got 230 parking spots. How are you generating that number?
Thank you, Chair, for that question. So I am the transportation project manager on this file. I would just like to point out that even though there's 230 parking spaces, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is traveling at peak hour. The traffic the people living in the building can travel during off-peak. And when we're looking at peak hours, we're looking at the worst case scenario. And in that case, we only have 36 trips that are being generated by this development.
But how do you land on 36 is what I'm not understanding.
So we have a trans trip generation manual from where we calculate the trip rates. And this is a whole comprehensive study that's done, which looks at local surveys, which looks at, other factors to come up with the rates. And that is how we determine what the auto vehicular mode share would be for this area.
And has there been any adjustments to the calculation made post-pandemic, where we know we've seen a dramatic shift on how people live and work and move around their communities, especially in the suburbs? I'll use, school drop-offs as an example. Has there been any change to the way you calculate peak trips post-pandemic?
I believe we're still looking into it, but it's still the worst case scenario still even now is during peak hours. So the most amount of traffic still is generated at in that AM and PM peak hours.
And how does the TIA impact your recommendation? Like, have you ever looked at a TIA and said, actually, this isn't going to work?
It depends on neighborhoods and areas as well. If it's a TOD area, we might ask for more transit mode shares and things like that. In this scenario, it is mostly auto, and that, like you said, has been identified in the TIA. And it's still conservative. So I'm sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay. No, I'll leave it there. It's just, I think we need to do a little soul searching as a council. This area is where 1/5 of the residential development in the city is going. 230 parking spots for 164 units, which I think is the antithesis to everything we're trying to do as a city. But there's no other transportation options. We cannot fault suburban residents for driving if we don't give them other options. And in this example, I'm raising alarm bells because I foresee problems at this intersection when it gets built. But I consistently feel like I'm the only one saying, wait a second, I think there's going to be a problem here. And I want to support this. I applaud the developer for including affordable housing in this proposal. We need diversification of housing in the suburbs, but we cannot do it at the expense of unsafe infrastructure and increased emissions and reduced quality of life. We had a good win today on transportation for South Orleans. I'm hopeful that this will help, but I think we need a rethink on how we approach transportation planning. And I know I'm not the only councillor around this table that feels this way, but I think I represent one of the most extreme examples of it just not working. So I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I had the pleasure of texting with Councillor Kitts a little bit last night about what we were seeing, and I just would like to understand sort of the process by which some of these sites become online. Can we walk through how this happens, right? So this lot had it was called development reserve, right? So it was being held for development. It is owned by the applicant at that time? Or is it just something that's identified within our own boundary?
It may or may not be owned by the same person that brings forward a development proposal.
Okay, so we have this we'll use the example of this particular application, obviously. So we have this parcel of land. It's being held until we can have the services, anticipated for infrastructure. So with respect to stormwater management and those types of underground systems. Once we can foresee that those hookups are possible, then how does this application come to us?
So there is a very straightforward process to lift a holding provision once the requirements of the hold have been met. It's a bylaw is taken straight to council and listed on the bylaws to do that. But there is an application process, a very straightforward one, to lift a hold. So they can't pull the building permit until that hold is lifted.
Okay, so we remove the hold. The applicant puts forward a proposal like this. Yep, go ahead.
They would
Jump in.
typically put forward a site plan proposal before they would apply to lift the hold, or in concert with lifting the holding provision.
Okay.
But they would go through that process through site plan, and I believe this one will go through site plan to look at, how the site functions, the landscaping, all of those types of things. In this area, they could also go through a plan of subdivision on some of these sites that are development reserve instead of a site plan, because some of these sites are large and will ultimately be developed through subdivision as opposed to planned unit development or something that triggers a need for site plan.
So have there ever been a circumstance where the city has said, we can anticipate the servicing on site, so under these circumstances, we would lift the hold, but the transportation planning is so lags or there's such a gap that we will actually keep the hold on until we can see some of the transportation infrastructure come into place?
When we're dealing with piped infrastructure, the capacity is very finite. And if there are, if we exceed the capacity of a piped infrastructure, there are, immediate ramifications with respect to basement flooding or lack of pressure in a water system or things like that. With respect to transportation infrastructure, and to build on the question that Councillor Kitts was asking previously, I'm not aware of any developments that have been refused due to overall network capacity. The capacity isn't defined as finitely as the capacity of a pipe. The cars will get through the system, it will take longer. And that's the approach that we've taken on transportation. And to this point, I'm not aware of any instances where we have, refused an application or left it in limbo due to transportation capacity on a network scale. Often the TIAs will identify improvements that are needed, more locally to that development, whether it's a turn lane in or an intersection improvement, things like that we would then work with the developer to implement, to improve the situation, or at least not worsen it. I hope that answers your question.
I mean, it does answer my question in the sense that, we do know that eventually the network will allow for cars to pass through. I think right now we have a circumstance where we have a councillor who is essentially begging for alternative transportation options in her ward. So she's not, I don't mean to speak on your behalf, but I don't hear the councillor advocating for greater car capacity in this instance neither. We have a transit, like the TIA for this report was a bit of a horror show, if I can say. Like it had collisions, it had an unsignalized left turn, it was demonstrating that an intersection will fail. It was like a bingo card of things that could go wrong with the transportation options for this neighborhood. And I don't mean to call into question anyone's integrity, but what I'm suggesting is perhaps these, if we have never refused an application on the basis of a TIA, have we ever considered not doing TIAs at all? I think that sometimes that might feel more honest and transparent to the residents that are being served by these neighborhoods.
We do have thresholds of development that don't require TIAs on some larger developments where they do trigger the need. I think the staff perspective is that they provide value and that they identify improvements that could be made and recognize at the same point that overall network capacity issues are typically not the responsibility of an individual developer, but of the city through development charges and the transportation master plan to meet those capacity expectations over time. And I've had conversations with the ward councilor on this as well, and I think there are capacity issues in the East End that are expected to be identified or worked through the transportation master plan, and over time through the development charges and funding becoming available to implement some of the changes identified. but we typically don't look to individual developments to solve overall network capacity issues.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think that residents are and councillors are feeling frustrated by the fact that these TIAs don't talk to each other. And if you look at an intersection like Merivale, Clyde, and Maitland, you know, we have, you know, up to, I think, 17 different applications along that stretch between 3 wards. And we have, you know, only through the collaboration and communication of ward councillors sometimes do we know what's happening on either side of Merivale. So we have a concern here, and I don't know what the solution is, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate to let this moment pass by. I don't see, as you say, the merits to refuse the application upon transportation, but I want to see this council and this committee and transportation committee certainly get their butts in gear to get some of this transportation options out to these areas, because they are absorbing so much of our development, and we want them to, but we need to champion active and multimodal transportation in those areas. Otherwise, this is just bad planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I know that we have parking minimums in our zoning, which frankly I think is something that needs to go, and I will be advocating for the end of parking minimums as part of our zoning bylaw review. Are there parking maximums?
Chair, in areas that are close to high order transit, there are areas where we have implemented parking maximums. You know, recognizing that over time that there will be higher order transit there, and not wanting to see seas of parking.
Okay, well, I just want to express my support for Councillor Kitts and her concerns about the lack of transportation infrastructure, but I'm going to choose to dissent on this file because I think that 164 units and 230 parking spots is just a grossly, to me, it's just an absurd amount of parking. I mean, this assumes that quite a lot of the people living in what I assume are very small apartments are going to have 2 vehicles. And I agree that it's bad planning. So I don't think there's, you know, I'm not encouraging other folks to dissent if they don't feel they need to. I don't think that we have many tools at our disposal to reject this application, but this is entirely regressive to have this many parking stalls for the number of people living there. And I understand that this is because we are not giving suburban residents an option other than driving, but we desperately need to do so. So I'm going to choose to dissent. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add to a few things that Councillor Johnson raised about, you know, the value of traffic studies and how they may influence or impact a recommendation. To the average resident who is engaged in planning files, particularly in my ward, and I'll use the example of Riverside at Hunt Club, colleagues will remember the Taggart application, a mixed-use development at this intersection. The intersection itself is rated an F. The intersection cannot move traffic properly, and before COVID, on, I don't know, game night, poor weather, the traffic southbound on Riverside would go past Walkley Road. We're talking about multiple kilometers waiting to get on the bridge. And so for the public, they're like, why would you approve a development when your transportation is a mess? They see 2 separate silos not working congruently together. And I remember that Steve Blay, who used to chair transportation after that meeting, because I voted against, because I thought, okay, I thought the planning file had strong merits, but our transportation system was completely not keeping up to the demands there. And his line was, the inconvenience that this will cause is not strong enough to vote against the planning file. But to the average resident, that's crazy. The average resident looks to the city and says, all right, if you're going to approve planning file after planning file, then your transportation network has to match the demands of those residents. Councillor Curry came to us maybe a year ago, the Brazil proposal in North Canada, and she argued you didn't have the infrastructure in place in the immediate community to serve this development, and that was her argument. So I think, to Councillor Johnson's point, there needs to be a better way to intertwine, in this case, transportation demand needs, because otherwise, to her point, why do these studies? There are some conclusions that our own staff have made in the past where they give a green light after they analyze the consultant's report, and I'm like, I have no idea how you came to those conclusions. Bit of a head scratcher. So unlike my colleague who sits beside me, I am going to support this application, but I do make the point that, you know, to Councillor Kitt's point, completely understand that if we want to encourage any modes other than sort of private vehicle, the infrastructure has to be in place, and we have to certainly do better in that regard.
Thanks, Chair. We have some great plans for transit infrastructure in the East End, like really, really great plans. There'll be a transitway someday. There was a good announcement about Brian Coburn, so someday we're going to have some bus priority. I have no idea what the timelines are. I'm going to guess they're more than 2 or 3 years out, maybe much more. We have great plans. I'm wondering if Mr. Mark could give us some advice. If we were to add, say, a hold to this property so that it couldn't proceed until we were within a 2 or 3 year timeline to build some of this transit, what would our likelihood be in an appeal, or what would our risks be? Can we even do that? Can we even add a hold that's contingent on transit infrastructure being built to this general area?
Mr. Chair, if there were something that was relatively imminent, let's say a year or two, you might be able, the committee and council might be able to succeed on that simply because of the time to get to a hearing and a fixed date for seeing the element of the hold being met. I am not aware of any case where a hold has been upheld on an unknown provision of transit.
Thank you. Between now and this comes to council, I'd certainly be open to working with any colleagues who have ideas on if there's appropriate hold or other way to ensure that developments like this in any part of the city are better timed with actual realization of some of the great plans we have for transportation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. We are going to be embarking on a discussion about development charges soon, and transit infrastructure that we need to support is paid for through development charges. The development community will talk to us about how much that adds to the cost of housing. But without those development charges, we don't get the infrastructure. So, you know, it's all very elegant how the city gets planned on paper, but it starts to fall apart when we don't charge adequate taxes, when we don't charge adequate development charges to pay for the infrastructure, soft and hard, that we need to support growth. So it's one thing for this committee, absolutely, to approve the developments that result in intensification, that result in the housing that needs to get built in order to accommodate the population that our official plan projects, in order to accomplish the builds that accomplish the growth management strategy. But as we move through the development charges discussion, I hope colleagues will remember what we're talking about at this table today. I've heard a couple of councillors expressing their interest in dissenting on this one, so I will ask for a yeas and nays vote, please, Kelly.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Curry? Councillor Dudas?
Yes.
Councillor Johnson?
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Councillor Kelly?
No.
Councillor Kitts?
No.
Councillor Lowe?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
Yes.
Councillor Troster?
No.
Vice Chair Gower?
Yes.
And Chair,
Yes.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you very much, Coordinator. So that item carries, which is the end of our more substantial agenda. I think I'd already mentioned, oh, sorry, we don't have any in-camera items. I think I'd already mentioned the cash into Parkland is there for us. We've passed the motion with respect to the signs on the private church land. Are there any notices of motion for our next meeting, which is coming up at the end of March? None. Councillor Troster, you had an inquiry?
Thank you, Chair. In Ward 14 and across the city, we continue to see the same pattern play out where many long-term tenants are served N13 eviction notices. Cosmetic changes to units are made, and then the unit is relisted for a much higher rent, leaving low-income tenants, often seniors, with nowhere to go. Following recent reports from organizations including the Canadian Housing Renewal Association, the Alliance to End Homelessness, and Acorn Ontario, as well as the decisive action taken by our colleagues in Hamilton to implement a comprehensive anti-rent-eviction bylaw, having more hard data about rent evictions and above-guideline rent increases in our city is desirable. So I'd like to know what's the year-over-year incidence of issuances of N5, N12, N13, and AGIs at the landlord-tenant board in Ottawa from 2010 to 2023, and what's the rate of increase, if any? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Excellent inquiry. I'm looking forward to hearing those answers. Just as a preview, Stephanie, do we have a report coming in from, I think, the housing sector on the loss of affordable housing units? Is that at the end of March or in April? End of March? Okay, so a few threads coming together, but Steve Pomeroy should be coming in to describe the results of his most recent research. I don't believe we have any other business. We're adjourned until our next meeting on Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. Colleagues, thanks for a good discussion.